We want to welcome you tonight to the joint meeting of the City of Oklahoma City and the Oklahoma Department of Transportation. My name is Eric Winger. I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Oklahoma City, and I welcome you tonight and appreciate your attendance again to obviously a very important meeting. I think many of you, as we have walked into the door, I see a lot of familiar faces from the meeting that we had in late August, and so obviously as we work tonight, this is the second meeting of several that we plan. I know that there's some additional design, and so our focus tonight is to discuss the area of Western, Classen, and Reno, one of those key areas of the new boulevard that was questioned at our last meeting. And so we welcome you tonight with that. I've got a few folks that I'd like to recognize in the audience. We have a few elected officials with us. I know that we've got, from the City of Oklahoma City, we've got Councilman Pat Ryan. We've got Councilman Ed Shadid. We've got Councilwoman Meg Salyer, and we also have Councilman Pete White. So if you would please stand, and we appreciate you tonight. Thank you. I may have missed some other elected officials. Do we have other elected officials that I have missed? And my apologies in advance. I see somebody pointing, and I cannot see all the way into the... Oh, I'm sorry. We've also got Councilman Gary Mars with us tonight as well from City of Oklahoma City, Ward 1. So thank you very much. Well, as we get started, obviously a very important design as we talk about the Oklahoma City Boulevard. There's been a lot of questions, and we hope to bring you tonight a lot of answers. When we look at the agenda for tonight, I'm going to finish up these introductions, but we're going to talk a little bit about the project history. We're going to talk about the area that is in discussion. We've gone through a lengthy process over the past couple of months, several weeks, looking at various alternatives. Our consultant that was engaged by the City of Oklahoma City, Stantec, is here tonight to present to you various scenarios and design opportunities, evaluation criteria. We're going to talk about how they did the alternatives development, and then we also have a recommendation and Q&A as well. In late August, one of the things that we talked about was the project history, and when we talk about the relocation of Interstate 40, when we talk about the construction of the new boulevard, these are things that did not begin just recently. There's been a lot of work that's been underway for quite some time. When we look at the work that began in 2008 with the relocation, we talked a little bit about the agreements between the city and ODOT and the record of decision. This has been something that's been going on for quite some time. These are some of the old photos of the old interstate as we all remember that. Most of that has been demolished now through the Crosstown. The last pieces of that are being wrapped up now. This is also that east section that has now been demolished through the city's east side, the Bricktown area. We're finally up to that point now where ODOT's ready to begin that design of the new boulevard, and there's been a lot of progress made in the last year. When we look at that project history, in 96, there were citizen advisory committees. In 97 and 98, there was research and studies. In December of 98, that was where Alternative D was selected, and that's the location of the current Interstate 40. And in 2002, the record of decision. In June of 2002, the land acquisition was underway. In 2005, the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Interstate 40. Just this past February, Interstate 40 opened, and today in August of 12, we had the first public meeting, and now we're finally to the second meeting. This was one of those original slides that we showed at that late August meeting, and I think this was the area that caused most concern. What was originally proposed was a bridge spanning Western, Classen, and Reno Boulevard. I put up a slide at that time that talked about the record of decision, and then this was a decision that was made that a lot of the existing interstate was going to be rehabilitated through this section, but concerns that we heard from you, concerns that we heard from business owners, was that this might not enhance development in the area, that it wasn't walkable, that it wasn't friendly. Obviously, it had traffic in mind when it was talking about having an access into and out of downtown. That is one of the goals. We do have to provide some new accesses in and out of downtown. There's a lot of challenges occurring right now along Western Avenue. Those that are commuting into downtown are seeing tremendous backup on I-40. Those that are trying to leave from downtown or specifically after game events are having a hard time getting back on the interstate through the Western corridor. The boulevard is absolutely necessary to provide that traffic in and out of downtown. We also have some other goals with the boulevard to make sure that it provides a means to showcase our city, to showcase our downtown, but there are alternatives to this design, and so that's where we begin tonight. This is another one of the renderings that was shown, talking about some of the vertical walls that were being proposed, trying to encourage development, but obviously this first pass was not acceptable. Following the meeting, we sought City Council support and gained that in hiring a consultant. And so tonight, we contacted a number of engineering firms. We had telephone interviews to expedite the process. We shortlisted firms, but we weren't looking for a firm that was just a traffic engineer. We were looking for one that was also a developer, one that was also a planner, and we found that tonight. There are a lot of goals in Oklahoma City, and especially for our downtown connections, and one of the things is growth. We do want to promote downtown development. We do want to promote the future of Oklahoma City. And so negotiations were completed in September of 2012, and we engaged Stantec. Stantec's a firm that was founded in 1954. It's a nationally recognized firm in the transportation industry. They're also an expert in roundabouts, and so we talked about roundabouts at length at our last meeting and what were the opportunities for a roundabout on the boulevard. They have actually designed over 100 roundabout projects across the nation, but they've also been able to provide us with a lot of opportunities as well to look at some other areas of this crucial area of downtown in Western Avenue. So as I get ready to introduce the two gentlemen that we have with us tonight, I'm going to introduce John Charlo and Bill Ferris. Both of these gentlemen are from Stantec. We've been working very closely with them for a number of weeks. They're going to take the presentation and walk through this process that we engaged them on, one that was a very independent study. At the conclusion, we'll have some Q&A, so I would ask that you save your questions until the end. And so without further delay, John Charlo.
Thank you and good evening. Let me start by saying it's really been an honor for us to be working with you on this project. It's definitely been a project that you've been involved with for a long time, and it has the potential to really transform this portion of the community. If you step back and think about this from a land planning, community planning standpoint, you're taking an area that once was a limited access freeway where land use is backed up to the freeway, and looking at the possibility of repurposing that roadway to something else. It's important to remember that it still has to work with the roadways that are around it, and it still needs to work in a way that supports the businesses and the neighborhoods that are out there as well. And so when we were given this assignment, we looked at the fact that the corridor was there. It's an east-west corridor, used to be a freeway corridor, and now the freeway corridor has been moved to the south. But one of the key things about land use planning and community planning is that the roadways, the transportation system, and the land use system are intrinsically linked. And so as we started to put together our analysis, we took what's called the functional classification system, and I'm not going to give you a lot of jargon, but that's just a fancy way of saying what's the roadway network that serves this part of the city. And roadways are divided up in a hierarchy from limited access freeways all the way down to the local street that provides access to individual properties. Each one of them has design standards, whether it emphasizes mobility, like a limited access freeway, or emphasizes access. And so this is the main thoroughfares, the major arterials that related to the boulevard corridor. And we then looked at the minor arterials, again, because you didn't have individual property access on the freeway. The businesses in that corridor are dependent upon a strong paralleling set of collector streets to be able to provide their access. And so we then looked at the rest of the transportation system and the future transit hub in close proximity to the downtown portion. And so one of the things I want to just highlight here is that if you simplify this, and you look at the graphic that Mr. Wanger showed just a few minutes ago, the original design, you had a limited access freeway that was elevated, and all of these movements that were here were able to function without a lot of conflict because they were grade separated. So if you take away the grade separation, and I know that that's an objective for a number of the people in this room, you still have to find ways in which this corridor relates to all of those movements. And if you look at it simply like this diagram does, there's really four major east-west roadways that parallel each other, roughly parallel each other through this area. The boulevard corridor itself is an east-west corridor, but it actually crosses Reno, and so there's a point of conflict there. But if you look at the converging roadways with Exchange and Klein and so forth, there's a lot of movements that need to be dealt with one way or another, and that was really some of the key focus points for our work. And so within an area of roughly 800 feet, you've got to find a way to resolve all of those issues. So the process that we went through was to identify all of the pertinent land use information that's available, all of the studies that have been done in and around the area. There isn't really a master plan for the downtown or for this portion of the corridor. I know you've been working hard on Plan OKC, but that isn't done yet. And so we identified all of the land use information we could find. We put that together. We looked at it. We walked the corridor. We drove the corridor. What I just put up on the overlay there in the purple is surplus right-of-way. So one of the things that needs to be thought about as this process goes forward is if you're going to have the boulevard function as a lower classification roadway carrying less traffic, smaller lanes if you will, there is some surplus right-of-way out there. And that surplus right-of-way has the potential to ultimately augment and enhance the businesses that are out there, could support redevelopment of the corridor long term. We took the existing zoning and overlaid that and looked at the zoning, and then brought into it the corridor shore plan, which was obviously one of the more ambitious plans that has been done that affects the area, and one that there's implementation steps that you're going forward with. A very exciting Central Park project that's in the planning stages, the convention center, and so forth. And it's important for me to say that we did this as a planning team before we got together with our engineering counterparts. And so as we looked at it as urban planners, we said, really the corridor breaks down into some logical segments. There's what we call the Boulevard Downtown Zone, and that's the area where I think you're really going to see the most transformation. It's the area where, as you saw from the slides previously, and you certainly know because you live here, used to be the downtown was literally walled off by a huge section of elevated freeway. And I know that you know, after looking at taking down those large bridges, that the opportunity to see into that area and the visual improvement is dramatic. Well, if you add to that the future Central Park and the public realm improvements that are currently being designed for the boulevard in this corridor, it really has the potential to transform that area. We then identified what we call the Boulevard Transition Area. And this area that we call the Boulevard Confluence Zone is that area where all of those roadway patterns and those traffic movements I spoke of previously come together, and then the Boulevard Access Zone. We put together a number of specific recommendations for each of those areas. Each one of them has the potential to be improved in a number of ways. Stepping back and identifying where are the key intersections along the boulevard that need to be thought about. Where are there opportunities for urban design improvements to create a sense of arrival into that area. And so if we look at that again, we've got the Boulevard Access Zone, the Boulevard Confluence Zone, the Boulevard Transition Zone, and the Downtown Boulevard Zone. Now, as we thought about those, again, I mentioned that there isn't a single overarching master plan for the downtown, but there are a number of planning studies that have been done. A streetscape plan was done. There's a number of plans that have looked at pedestrian enhancements and trails and bike paths and so forth. So we pulled together all of that information and summarized where there are key intersections, key nodes, key gateway viewpoints, and so forth, and overlaid all of the work that had been done on those bicycle and pedestrian studies, and identified on the boulevard where are those key places where those studies would interface with the boulevard. And again, from our perspective, one of the areas where I think you're going to find the most dramatic improvement is the opportunity to extend the really tremendous investment that's been happening in the downtown. Just anecdotally, I haven't been to Oklahoma City in about 25 years, and I was really amazed at the renaissance that's going on here. And that doesn't happen by accident. It takes an engaged citizenry and public and private sector leaders. And so congratulations for what you've already accomplished. And I know that with what's on the books and the next chapters are going to be especially bright as well. So in summary, when we got together with our engineering counterparts, we said, as we look at this project, there's a number of objectives that could be identified. One, it certainly is an opportunity to reinforce the corridor shore plan recommendations. Several places along the corridor and in slightly different designs, depending upon the circumstances and the adjacent land uses, but throughout the Boulevard project, opportunities for enhanced pedestrian and bicycle access facilities and crossings. As I mentioned, there's a number of businesses along that corridor, light industrial businesses and others. It's important that no one takes away from this presentation the message that we're suggesting that anyone gets pushed out of there or that the city should rush to redevelop that area. I think it's going to take several decades for that area to redevelop, but there is surplus right-of-way, and the improvements, the addition of the amenity of the boulevard through the corridor does present an opportunity for those property owners over time, and that surplus right-of-way can be added to that property to put more land back on the tax rolls, if you will. So support economic development opportunities in economic growth. I do a lot of work in green infrastructure. This is a corridor that's going to have the introduction of a number of trees, and so that enhanced urban tree canopy along the corridor has a very positive effect in terms of air quality and the opportunity to manage stormwater in a natural way. Provide an enhanced public realm with improved streetscape facilities, improve overall transportation efficiency and circulation to and from the downtown, and support enhanced traffic movements, and really try and correct some of those street inefficiencies. Again, because you had the geometry of those roadways that were in place when you had a freeway that was grade separated, there's a number of triangularly shaped parcels. There's a number of intersections with roadways that come in at an angle that this project gives you the opportunity to fix some of those. And so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bill Ferris, who's going to go through the alternatives. And again, as Mr. Wenger said, we're very happy to answer questions at the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And maybe I ought to start off by a little bit of evolution. A lot of times folks think that the planners get involved up front, which would be John, and then the traffic engineers come in midway and decide to change everything. I think our relationship, even though John is from Minneapolis and I'm from Phoenix, has been very synergistic. And I think you'll see through the results that we've incorporated numerous planning elements in the development of a functional roadway. And to kick it off, we want to talk about alternatives. And we really had, we were uninhibited by anyone when we started this project. We had a clean slate, a white canvas, if you will. So we went immediately to what was originally proposed. And number one here is grade separated roadway. That was the old I-40. It's gone now. We certainly have heard loud and clear we don't want that back. But we also didn't want to necessarily shout anyone down saying, you know, that's a bad idea. Let's get all the ideas out and then let's go through a logical process to shorten that list of potential alternatives. So we also looked at grade separated intersections. Not a continuous 1,100-foot long wall, but maybe the occasional intersection that is grade separated. And what I mean by grade separated is where you have a roadway that goes underneath and a roadway that goes up above it, approximately separated by 20 to 25 feet vertically in elevation. So we looked at that. We also obviously looked at roundabouts. Between myself and actually Tom Fiddler, can you raise your hand? Tom's probably designed personally well over 100 roundabouts. I've designed roundabouts from the affluent neighborhoods of Scottsdale, Arizona to up and around New York City. So we have a lot of experience to pull from, and I think you'll see the results of that in some of the alternatives that have been proposed. We also want to look at parkways, more of a boulevard type scenario. We wanted to introduce a few things that maybe you haven't seen here locally. Indirect left turns, which we call the super street concept, which had its origins in North Carolina. And I'll show you a couple of photos that'll explain the indirect left concept. We also looked at limiting access, potentially closing a street for the betterment of the functionality of the boulevard proper. And I'll show you some examples of that as well. Roundabouts, when I was here a couple of months ago, I saw a presentation, I believe it was at the farmer's market, where a roundabout expert came in and explained a lot of detail on roundabouts. I'm not going to regurgitate that, but I will hit on a few key points. The benefits of the roundabout, as you can see on the diagram, I'll start with the signalized intersection. All these yellow dots indicate conflict points between vehicles. Vehicles on one street with vehicles crossing on another street. The red stars are vehicle pedestrian conflict points. Just by the clustering, you'll notice there's a lot less happening at the roundabout, a lot less conflict. And what we do find is that when an accident does occur in a roundabout, it's usually at a much slower speed. The accidents tend to be less damaging. You also will notice on the roundabout, it acts as a traffic calming measure because you're not going straight through, you're going on a curve, and generally speeds are lower than at a signalized intersection. Also, geometrically, you'll notice that the signal is at a 90-degree angle, and the roundabout is very good when you have a leg coming in at an acute or obtuse angle. It allows us to more properly get traffic through an intersection. As I mentioned earlier, we've designed well over 100 roundabouts. You see a planning level schematic here, and then actually a constructed roundabout here. This is just a one-lane roundabout. We also have unique situations where you have a two-lane roundabout here, but with special pedestrian or bicyclist accommodations around the edges. Or an instance where you need to build an apron to accommodate oversized vehicles, or large volumes of traffic. Obviously, we have a freeway here with a multi-leg roundabout on the north side and more of a diamond configuration ramp on the south side. But roundabouts do serve a purpose in many locations and in many situations. We also have some more unique intersection layouts that I was alluding to before, and I'm not quite sure why this happens, but I'm not sure if you can see this in the back, but this is a McDonald's. I think there's a McDonald's on every project that we do these days, and it's right at the meat of the conflict point, if you beg my pardon. In this situation here, this happens to be in North Carolina. This road here is more of the boulevard, looking at the similarity to this current project. And then we have a side street here, less traffic on the side street than there will be on the boulevard. But under this particular scenario, the boulevard is allowed to come to a signalized intersection, and you can turn left, you can go through, or you can turn right. The side street, what we've done here is restricted some movements. You can still come up to the intersection and go straight through. You can go to the right, but you are not allowed to turn left. And the approach we're going to use is, in order to turn left, you actually have to turn right, come down, and do a U-turn. It's a little different, but what we find is the functionality of the intersections is greatly enhanced. The signalized intersections, the number of phases used, the number of greens per direction, the overall functionality of that intersection is greatly enhanced. To take it to an extreme, and I apologize if this is a little bright in the back, but the boulevard would be this roadway, and we have another side street here. In this particular instance, the boulevard, again, you can go left, you can go through, or you can turn right. However, on the side street, we are eliminating a left, we are eliminating a through, and we are forcing all three lanes to turn right. And if you want to end up going through or to the left, you go down and do a U-turn and come back. Again, it's just another option in our toolbox to ensure the functionality of the traffic on your boulevard. Those were some of the tools that we used to brainstorm the options. And after the presentation, all, I believe, 38 of the alternatives and their sub-options are available on the tables off to my left. The preferred alternatives, A through D, are enlarged at the back of the room. This just shows a smattering of the alternatives on these two slides. You can see here the boulevard is shown in yellow. The west terminus, we're going to look at, this is roughly Klein. We have Western here, which connects to I-40 to the south. We have Reno's intersection with the boulevard. And then the eastern limit, this is Walker. And I'll go through some of the details on the short list of alternatives, but a few key things. Yellow means more substantial work. This is a reconstructed roadway, which, as you know, in areas right now, the boulevard is grassland or leftover concrete ramps, et cetera. Blue indicates less work, maybe modifying a right turn lane or adjusting a signal timing. Then the orange indicates a structure, a bridge structure. Green indicates a roundabout here and here. And just touching on this, this again is a boulevard concept where the boulevard comes through. There are ramps connecting at Klein. We have realigned Western to line up with Classen. Over here we have multiple roundabouts and tried to keep the exchange spine intact. And we've kept Classen in its current alignment. And I'm not quite sure what to tell you about this one. Again, we did not want to stop anyone's creative juices from flowing, but this shows Western being relocated way to the west, crossing the boulevard under the existing, there's an ODOT bridge that exists today, and then coming back up to Sheridan. And then here we have a very large roundabout of the boulevard connection with Western to the south, Classen to the north. A couple more alternatives. We show again a grade separation, a bridge. This one happens to be at Klein. Again, we're kind of maintaining the exchange spine with tandem roundabouts. You'll notice here that the boulevard actually at Classen, do I have this right? Well, you have multiple roundabouts here, and the boulevard does not turn at this point. The boulevard actually extends through. Reno extends through. So we really looked at many alternatives, and in fact, at our first debriefing after our first charrette, we got comments back that from folks attending from planning and traffic and public works and from ODOT and a few others. We were actually kind of shocked with some of the alternatives that showed up. Can you actually discontinue Reno? Can you actually discontinue the boulevard? We wanted to look at all options. Then what we did after that brainstorming session is we went back and we said, okay, we need to take 38 or 40 alternatives and start to funnel them down. So we developed some evaluation criteria. We wanted to look at right-of-way impacts. We wanted to look at the functionality of the boulevard and the adjacent roadway network. We wanted to ensure that we were facilitating future development opportunities. We actually looked at the remaining elevated roadway. So if we were taking what was originally planned as 1,100-foot elevated structure, but we narrowed that down to just one single bridge over one roadway, how would we evaluate that? And we looked at each alternative in that vein. We looked at, are the alternatives driver friendly? Are we rerouting folks? As I mentioned, we currently proposed realigning Western with Classen to better capture some of the peak hour movements for commuter traffic. We looked at alternatives that facilitated pedestrian and bicyclist activity. We looked at improving existing network deficiencies. For example, on Sheridan today, the Western and Classen intersections with Sheridan are very close together. We wanted to look at an opportunity to improve that particular area. And then, of course, we wanted to address major event traffic. Hopefully, come June, you'll have event traffic with the NBA Finals. We want to make sure we're accommodating events just like that. So what was our next step? We took those 38 concepts, we plugged them through the evaluation criteria, and reasonably quickly we got down to 7 alternatives. And we said, okay, that's a step in the right direction. Let's see if we can narrow it a little further. And I kind of let the cat out of the bag. A couple of things that we did want to discuss were Reno must remain as a through movement, the Boulevard must remain as a through movement, and Western has to be maintained as a connector to the new I-40. I believe that originally there were 6 exits from I-40 into the downtown area. After the relocations, we're now down to 2, so it's imperative to retain Western as one of those connectors. So we went through a further evaluation implementing those criteria, and we quickly got down to 4 alternatives for detailed traffic analysis. We've made our pretty pictures. We've looked at all the development opportunities, and then we said, okay, we need to double check to make sure that these alternatives work before we present them to you. So we did a detailed traffic analysis. Through working with the city's traffic department, we went out and literally took turning movement counts during the peak hour, the heaviest traveled hour in the morning and in the evening, and these are the intersections where we collected that data. You may have even seen someone out with an orange vest and a traffic counter, literally counting every car that went left, through, or right at each of these intersections on each leg of each intersection. Then what we did is we took that current traffic, which is 2012, and we grew it out to the year 2030. We used a 1% growth factor. In a lot of areas across the country, that growth factor is much larger. Now, I know that from a geographic standpoint, Oklahoma City may be the largest city in the country. From a traffic volume standpoint, in the downtown area, what we wanted to look at is how much growth or how much build-out yet remains within this project corridor. What we felt was there is a fair amount of build-out in this vicinity, and so a 3, 4, or 5% growth rate did not make sense. But we need to account for some growth as we look out toward the future. And some may ask, well, why the year 2030? The standard of the day in the industry is to typically look out 20, 25, or 30 years into the future. So you may ask the question, why 18 years? Well, we wanted to be consistent with a lot of documentation that has already been done in the area. The regional transportation plan, I know, has been updated to 2035, but I believe it was originally set for 2030. There's the core to shore plan and a few others that use the 2030 time frame as their design horizon. So we wanted to be consistent with that, but more importantly, when we look at the largest capital cost on a project like this, it's typically the roadway. And roadways are designed to last with proper maintenance and proper rehabilitation techniques over its duration, 15 to 20 years. So we ended up with 18 years, and that gets us to the year 2030. So I want to take a few minutes and go through the 4 alternatives that have been sifted down from the 38 that were originally brainstormed. And we have here up on the screen a traffic simulation of what Alternative A would look like. Now, if you remember, on Alternative A, we have the boulevard that extends from west to east. We have Reno, also from west to east, and they're crossing at this location. And then we have Western that crosses the boulevard, and we've realigned Western slightly to the east to line up with Classen. Western is a 4-lane facility, Classen is a 6-lane facility existing. And you remember earlier I mentioned the deficiencies associated with the close proximity of Sheridan Western and Sheridan Classen. There's just not enough space to really get optimal functionality between those 2 intersections. The key element, I guess, here, and you'll notice that cars seem to be crossing each other, this is a grade-separated intersection. Folks that are driving on the boulevard will go up, over Western, and back down prior to getting to Reno. So in this area, the Klein area, we are no longer elevated. We are roughly down at grade, the elevation of the surrounding terrain in this area. About halfway between Klein and Western, we will start going up in elevation over top of Western, and then in about this area, we'll be headed back down to grade prior to the Reno Boulevard intersection. This particular alternative handles the critical intersection of the Boulevard and Western with that grade separation. Western underneath, the Boulevard over the top. Here we go, at this location here. Again, there will be some ancillary ramps, a connection from Sheridan onto the Boulevard westbound, a connection from the Boulevard to Klein southbound, and then here at Reno, there will be a very large intersection. We have provided access at these side streets, and then a significant intersection at Walker. ODOT was kind enough to do a couple of renderings of this alternative. Just to orient you here, this is the Reno Boulevard intersection. So this is Reno, and this is the Boulevard. And you'll notice here, we start to climb on the Boulevard up and over Western. You can see Western will travel through this area here, and then will be realigned over to Classen. You'll notice this section in here is a retaining wall, and the difference in height is between 20 and 25 feet between the 2 roadways. Here's another angle of the same alternative. Here we are at the west, looking downtown. Again, you see this retaining wall as we rise up over the top of Western, and then we start to come back down as we head toward Reno. We've seen the traffic simulation model, so I'll go on to Alternative B. Alternative B is 99% the same as Alternative A, the lone differentiator. At this location here, instead of the Boulevard going over top of Western, we're going to take Western over top of the Boulevard. That is the only difference in this alternative. But here's the impact of doing such. Try and orient you here. Here we have Sheridan to the north. This is Classen realigned over to Western. This is the bridge structure from roughly McDonald's over the Boulevard. This is the Horn Trader here. And you'll notice that even on Western, we've raised Western up, but we're going to have to depress the Boulevard. So along the Boulevard, you'll see a very long retaining wall that extends almost from Reno back toward Klein. And on Western, we still have to have a retaining wall in this area and this area. What does that mean? I guess from an access standpoint, can we go back to yeah, thank you. From an access standpoint, if you are at the Horn Trader, you will not have direct access to Western. You'll have to access from Reno because there will be a retaining wall 2 or 3 feet high at this particular location. Now, the designs have not been complete, but just ballpark, that's what we're looking at there. We think that because of the long retaining walls, it'll have some impact to the developable land there, some minor impact. Those are the differentiators between alternative A and B, and let's go ahead and show the, and again, the simulation actually is not going to look any different because this is still separated one level. It's just that Western is now going over top of the boulevard. All right, then I will move on in the presentation to look at alternative C. Oh, I'm sorry. We did have one more rendering, and this is the Reno intersection. So again, Reno is here. The boulevard extends across this way. And all of these renderings are available in the back following the presentation. Alternative C. In this alternative, we have eliminated the bridge that separated Western and the boulevard. In this location, what we've done is we've made it a signalized intersection. And I think what you'll see, I'll go over a couple of the idiosyncrasies, but you'll see what a large intersection it becomes. Very similar ramp from Sheridan to the Boulevard West, a ramp from Boulevard eastbound to Klein, a large intersection at both Reno and at Walker. With that, why don't we go to the sim model? Okay. So again, I mentioned a slight ramp here, a slight ramp here, and then this is at grade. So you'll notice that you start to get some traffic queuing, especially in the AM peak on Western. As folks are looking to come downtown to work, they'll come down I-40, get off at Western, and then start to distribute to downtown. So again, as I mentioned, a lot of traffic coming from I-40 and then coming up Western, and then we've realigned Western over to Classen. But you'll see a tremendous amount of traffic in this movement, and then a tremendous amount of traffic on the boulevard. Typically, we're looking at, from an average daily traffic standpoint, about 40,000 vehicles that's eastbound and westbound combined in this location. It's lower as you get downtown as traffic starts dispersing. We're looking at about 30,000 vehicles here over a 24-hour period. You can see this again is the AM peak, and you get a fair amount of queuing, but everything runs reasonably acceptable in this scenario. You also have the Reno intersection. Let's go to alternative D, because this one has the roundabout alternative. And you can see here, again, each of these last 4 alternatives, A, B, C, and D, has really been a compilation of the best component elements of the original 38 alternatives. It's been spliced together to ensure that we have the best solution in the Klein area, at the Reno area, at the Walker area. And then the focus here, the difference, is what's happening in the roundabout area. Here's a roundabout at the boulevard. So the boulevard is here, Western here, and Classen here. So you can see that we've really eliminated this section of Western. We've eliminated some of the old ODOT ramps. We have actually eliminated Classen's connection here as we've realigned Western to Classen. What you notice, though, is this roundabout takes up a massive footprint. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we've also gone and added a third lane to the roundabout, which will cause, one of our criteria was being driver friendly. It's a little bit of a challenge for those folks that maybe watched, I think it's European Vacation. Clark gets in the middle and he can't get out because of the additional lanes on either side. As this progresses, you'll start to see a tremendous backup on the boulevard, and you kind of ask yourself, why is that happening? With 40,000 vehicles a day on the boulevard, and then an additional 20 to 30,000 on the Western Classen arterial, as you get into the roundabout, you have the right-of-way. Once you are in the circle, you can take, let's take an example here. Once you get into the circle, you then have the right-of-way at this intersection. All these folks need to stop until there's a gap. And you can see that there are not many gaps, so this traffic starts to back up. And what we've found is that while you don't get gridlock, the intersection proper actually fails. And in the morning, this southern leg will actually back up through the intersection of Western with Reno. Now, if this was built today, would it work? It probably would, especially if we designed it with 3 lanes. But as we start to get out in the future, 5, 10, 15 years in the future, this won't work. It would have to be removed and replaced with a traffic signal or a grade-separated type intersection. Let's head back to the presentation. Thank you. So our recommendation is Alternative A, which was the grade separation of the new boulevard going over Western. It's the realignment of Western with Classen. We provide some minor access at Klein. We eliminate segments of Exchange, Classen, and Western. And part of the theory behind this is we feel Alternative A provides the superior development opportunities, less retaining wall along the boulevard frontage. We believe it provides superior pedestrian walkability, especially when you consider the grade separation of Western with the boulevard. You note that when under Alternative C, when we had an intersection which was down on the ground, you had 7, 8, 9, 10 lanes of traffic. That if you were a pedestrian, you would push that button to cross the boulevard, and you would have to go over 100 feet while that little white man is telling you you can cross. It's a challenge. Under the recommended Alternative A, you're going to have uninhibited access across, actually under the boulevard. So you will not have to cross all that traffic. Fewer utility impacts. I mentioned less retaining wall length, and also the ability to maintain traffic flow well out into the future. This again is showing Alternative A. Again, Western going underneath the boulevard. And kind of in conclusion, Alternative A provides integration into the surrounding transportation network and actually will improve on some of the existing deficiencies in the network. Fundamentally, we have the opportunity to change the image and character of the corridor and provide a greatly enhanced arrival experience into the city. We support and serve the existing corridor businesses while leveraging surplus right-of-way to support long-term redevelopment opportunities. And I didn't go into a lot of detail, but taking from John's presentation, The ODOT right-of-way for when I-40 existed previously was significantly larger than the right-of-way that will be required for the new boulevard. We want to take that surplus right-of-way to accomplish dual objectives of greening the corridor and to improve the image of the area. And we also want to complement and enhance the downtown core. With that, we'll be available for questions afterwards, but I'd like to turn it over to Eric to follow up with some other outcomes.
Thank you. I think when we started the initial presentation, one of our original goals from our last public meeting was to come with some recommendations on some alternatives to the long-span bridge that was such a concern at the last meeting. And I hope tonight that with Stantec's assistance and hopefully with the opportunity to look at some of the other design alternatives that weren't necessarily part of the presentation, you've gotten an idea that there were a lot of considerations taken to at least build a better boulevard. When we look at the different options, we actually had some additional outcomes that I've listed up here as some things that would also enhance downtown and west downtown. I think one of the things that you saw in the alternatives was the western class and traffic improvements. Those were where we can actually mitigate some of the existing challenges that we have with the intersections that are too close there on Sheridan Avenue. One of the other things that we looked at was increased accessibility. Those started out at Klein and the Boulevard. You saw some additional opportunities to get out of the boulevard onto some of the city grid. We also have some additional opportunities east of Western that would occur at Chartel and Lee, and those are some things that we'd like to further study as well. So when we came to you last time, I think one of the first conversations we had was at the first intersection was at Walker Avenue if you were eastbound into downtown, and we've provided, I think, through some analysis with Stantec, a lot of additional opportunities to access a lot of the development areas in the areas west. Roundabouts do have an opportunity in Oklahoma City, and I think as we visited further with planning and as we looked for additional opportunities, and although this may not be something we would build as a part of the Boulevard project, if you look at the area of Exchange in 3rd Street, there's a little excerpt here that's on the screen in front of you. We think that there's a tremendous opportunity for redevelopment in this area with a future roundabout at this location. This is something that we've already experienced in Oklahoma City on North Downtown. This would be at 10th and Walker. I think a lot of us are now familiar with the Plaza Court area there by Kaiser's and St. Anthony Hospital. We've been very successful with some single-lane roundabouts and encouraging development there. This would be something that we could help respond to the area and seek additional development opportunities and something that we might plan as a future city project, but definitely real possibilities for downtown. So as we get ready to go into the question and answer session, I think as we just summarize a few of the things, some of our goals were to ensure traffic and transportation, but we also wanted to make sure that planning, future development, and pedestrian friendliness were keys as a part of some of the solutions. We also wanted to enhance the access to the Interstate 40. Obviously, we're having some significant challenges with the Western Avenue connections, both in the morning and in the afternoon, also after game traffic, currently with a Thunder. And as downtown continues to develop, we're going to still see tremendous access. So building the boulevard is absolutely necessary to provide those additional enhancements to downtown. But I also wanted to thank our partners at ODOT. Obviously, as we come to you together tonight, I'd like to introduce David Streb. His staff has been instrumental tonight in making the facilities available. I think as you saw us at the first meeting, we really are partners. ODOT is wanting to make sure that they deliver to Oklahoma City a street that we can be proud of, one that has the city's input, and obviously your input tonight as we get ready to go into questions and answers is vital to make sure that we deliver what you want. And so with that, I'd like to invite David up to make some closing comments from ODOT's perspective and also introduce some of his key staff.
Thank you, Eric. I really do want to kind of jump on what Eric had to say in the partnership, because we've all been working on this project for a very, very long time. And I think what's being looked at is going to be a beautiful future for the downtown core for Oklahoma City. I want to introduce a couple of the key folks that are here and encourage you all as we break out. If your questions, if you're not comfortable in this setting, ODOT is also available to answer any questions you may have one-on-one. Casey Schell, our Director of Operations, is back there. Paul Green, our Division 4 engineer, has been very, very involved. Tim Tegler, our Head of Roadway Design. Bob Rush, our bridge engineer. Dawn Sullivan, our Environmental Programs Division. Terry Angier, Media and Public Relations, is also here, as well as John Bowman, Planning and Research. I think John's been here since the birth of the project. But one of the things I wanted to talk about on kind of how this fits in. The department, we have the new interstate open. It took us quite a while. We're very proud of that, and hopefully it's helping people move through Oklahoma City in a much safer manner. But I do think one of the awesome things on this is providing the city and the community to take the input on this section of the boulevard. This is a commitment as part of this project, the connection, the boulevard connecting the interstate on both sides of downtown. That was a commitment of the realignment of the I-40 interstate. What is left ahead of us is to complete the environmental assessment for this boulevard. And the department is anxious to see what that recommendation is, especially for this section of the boulevard, so that we can move forward in completion of this entire boulevard. And very proud of what Oklahoma City has done in hiring Stantec to take a very, very thorough look at what is a very complex situation. And we sure appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and hopefully we can answer some of your questions. Thank you.
And I think as I just wrap up the thank yous, and again from ODOT, we want to thank Bill Ferris and John Charlo from Stantec. I know that our city manager, Jim Couch, is in the audience, or at least I saw him earlier. I know Dennis Clowers, and I think maybe some of our other assistant city managers are here. Christy Yeager as well from our public information office was instrumental, and then I've got a few staff as well. I've got Harold Skidmore, our contract administrator. I've got Rachel Mosier, and then also Debbie Miller, our assistant city engineer, that's been instrumental in helping bring a lot of the information to you tonight with a host of others. But at this time, we're ready to go to questions and answers. We're going to have some folks that are in the audience with you, like we did last time, to offer you a microphone. So as you see the hands raised, if you do have a question, know that we've got opportunities for questions. We also have comment cards that you'll find. They should have been passed out to you. You can submit those tonight. We're going to leave the comment period open for 2 weeks, as we did in the first meeting. And so if you don't want to be recognized tonight, please be sure to leave your comments with us at the front table. You also can mail those in, but those are very important to us so that we can address those for the success of the project. So with that,
we're going to start in the back over there.
Questions?
Yeah, I'm Blair Humphreys, a resident of Oklahoma City, and I had a question as it relates to the boulevard's role as a bypass, connecting traffic from west of downtown through to the east of downtown. And as a follow-up question to that, I noticed that even with that as one of the stated requirements, you did still look at some of the boulevard concepts that carried through straight on to California. And being the case, that seems like that must have been a possibility that was considered. And it would look to me that just kind of taking the work that you've done, and I think the Classen to Western connection makes a lot of sense in light of the new on-ramp and off-ramp there and its connection north along Classen. Would it be possible to do basically alternative A, but carry it forward straight onto California? Just wondered if you could give us more thoughts on that. Based on the analysis that I've done, I don't see why that wouldn't be a possibility unless there was some intransigence as it relates to the east-west connection. Thank you.
So in response, I think as we discussed, and this probably was covered a little bit more in our first public meeting, but when the decisions were made to relocate the Interstate 40 early in the process, and we're talking about a decision that was made 10 years ago, there were some decisions by the City Council at that time and the State Department of Transportation that a new boulevard would be constructed on the current I-40 alignment to make sure that the area wasn't blighted. It was a key factor in part of the council's consideration at that time that you just simply could not move an access, that you had to make the reconnections to downtown, and obviously we're about halfway through that process now. The new interstate has been reopened, but the new boulevard not yet constructed. So there's an agreement with the City of Oklahoma City and ODOT to make that happen, but to further promote that as a part of the mitigation with Federal Highway Administration, ODOT had to seek Federal Highways approval. And that highway approval included the reconstruction of the boulevard not only as a mitigating factor for Oklahoma City, but also as a bypass in the event that there could be an emergency on Interstate 40. So it was a part of the original agreement that is allowing us to move forward with the boulevard construction as a throughway through downtown in the event that I-40 were, say, to have to close.
Mr. Winger, a couple follow-up questions as it relates to that. Are you saying that that agreement is not reversible? Given the context of the fact that things have changed in the last 14 years as it relates to downtown. Also, I would just question if it isn't reversible, why did the engineers study concepts that didn't look at connecting it through and actually looked at returning that portion of the boulevard to the grid? And finally, I just say that, it would seem strange that given the overall interstate network that we have, that we couldn't find other possibilities for creating a bypass for the new I-40 outside of ramming all that traffic through downtown. I don't know anybody in here that wants to see 130,000 cars a day rammed straight through the middle of downtown.
So there's a couple of questions there. I think to answer the first question, I'm going to ask for David Streb's assistance, as he's got a little bit more of the deeper history of the Boulevard decision. But on the second question, as it relates to Stantec and the charge that we gave them, when Stantec was hired by the city, we really did allow them to propose any and alternatives. We wanted to make sure that if there was something that maybe we weren't seeing or something that we might have missed, that they would pick that up. And so I think as you saw through the presentation, there were a series of alternatives that looked at closing Reno Avenue. There were a series of alternatives that looked at closing the Boulevard. As we discussed those further, when we looked at downtown traffic and downtown growth, those simply are just not possible from a traffic standpoint. But to better answer your question on is it a reversible decision on whether to build the Boulevard or not, I'm going to ask David and put him on the spot to see if he could shed some more light on that.
Thanks, Eric. And Blair, I appreciate the question. I think first and foremost, that boulevard is a mitigation commitment in the environmental document for the I-40 Crosstown. Can it be changed? Of course. Will it come with a great amount of effort? It very well could. Could it come with a great amount of time? It very well could. There are a variety of mitigations in that project. The pedestrian bridge was one of them. That was a process where ODOT had envisioned a much simpler, a little different, certainly not as an attractive or iconic pedestrian bridge as part of the project. Oklahoma City stepped forward, worked with us, worked with other agencies, and wanted to do something a little different than what was envisioned. It's worked out. The Skydance Bridge is awesome. But then we look at this boulevard, and basically we committed in the environmental document to do a 6-lane boulevard. And the city is stepping forward saying, hey, is that the best thing for the city? Do we need to do something different? And they are looking at a variety of different options, and so is the department. Whether it ends up being a 4-lane or a 6-lane or something totally different, that can always go back into the environmental process and make those changes.
Number of lanes, you'd also make similar changes if you had to change the right-of-way.
Correct.
So we're actually already going to change that environmental document either way, as long as we reduce the number of lanes.
What's going on is we're doing a separate environmental assessment for the entire boulevard.
So in light of that, I can't quite understand then why the bypass of the previous environmental document is still a requirement, given the fact that we're going to have to create a new one in light of the reduction from 6 lanes to 4.
Because I think the commitment is still there, Blair, to provide that boulevard, because that was part of the overall project approval.
But it won't be part of the new agreement will take place of the old agreement.
That's true in the long haul, as long as everything is evaluated thoroughly.
And then my final question would just be, would the city and Stantec be willing to look at alternative A, but modified in a way where it carried straight through to California, in light of the fact that it appears, based on what Mr. Streb has said, that the environmental document will be modified anyway? Thank you.
And tonight, although we're studying the area of Western Classen and Reno, there is a lot of additional work that's going on east of this area. When we talk about the new convention center, when we talk about the new MAPS 3 park, we talk about some unique opportunities for the city to further develop streets. There's a lot of MAPS 3 meetings that are being held. There's joint meetings that are being planned to make sure that those designs can further enhance downtown. So we have a tremendous opportunity with this new boulevard, through some of the previous planning and through some of those previous decisions, to provide this gateway to downtown that I think a lot of commitments were previously made.
Hi, Gary Elliott. I'm with Whitten Supply, a little further west than Klein. And at the last meeting, one of the things we visited about, and there was a lot of discussion, was not just the area that you've discussed, but the area west and how that would be treated. Would it be Lord? Would Blackwelder, Douglas, I think it is, other streets, would they remain open? Have you addressed that at all?
We have, and so as not specifically as a part of the meeting tonight, ODOT is anticipating another public meeting to look at the boulevard as a whole, similar to the first meeting. What I can update you on the work that, and from the comments that we received from the first meeting about concerns about access to, there's a tremendous amount of design that's underway to provide those enhancements, but they're going to be most likely at Virginia. Where the ramps are being constructed now to provide the access to the new boulevard, Pennsylvania is too far to the west to allow proper access. But Virginia looks like a tremendous opportunity for ODOT, and it's in design, and so those comments were well received, and so we're working on that now with them.
So the area west of Klein, between Klein and Virginia, would be lowered to grade?
No, it would still be built on its existing alignment, but when we were talking about the on-ramps and the off-ramps being eliminated, those are being designed back in so that there is access to the boulevard at that location.
I see. Thank you.
It's a little bright up here, so you have to hold your hand up for me to see. I'm sorry. I see you now.
Moody, can you get that mic to him?
My name's Sean Cummings. My question is, we seem to have given up on slowing this down and making this a friendly place for people to live. It appears that we've just given up on all that, and all we want to do is move traffic through. When was that decided, and who decided that? Because the last meeting, it seemed like a lot of people wanted this slowed down so we could build up that area, and the more it's built up, it's going to slow down naturally anyway. So who decided that?
Who decided on the slowing down of the design? I would suggest that the design was stopped with the comments that were received at the last meeting. And what we've been working on for the past almost 8 weeks is looking at alternatives to make sure that we get this area of the boulevard right before we proceed forward.
And a secondary question, it appears to me like all we're trying to do is move cars through. We know this area is going to get developed as soon as that starts coming through. It doesn't look like that's in anybody's plan.
I think if you were looking at the traffic models that were shown tonight show growth of traffic through the year 2030. So future planning is very much taken into consideration with the concepts that you've seen tonight. And if there is a consensus to move forward with one of the design options, it'll allow the engineers to do the design to make sure that we don't just address traffic today, but traffic in the future for nearly the next 20 years.
Maybe I'm not clarifying my question. I'm talking about as this area develops and people more people live there, there's more building there and everything else. All we've talked about tonight is moving traffic through. We haven't talked about how that's going to work as it develops, not as more traffic develops coming from the suburbs, but as traffic develops in that area, from people living there, more pedestrian traffic, more parking, more retail, everything else that's going to come with that. Just like it did over in Deep Deuce and it has down in downtown. I mean, in 15 years, this has all changed. Have we looked at that model?
Well, that's something that we're going to have to plan on as a development occurs. And so as we suggested in that final slide that I showed you, I think there are things like roundabouts, there's going to be additional street enhancements, but I think we, the city, are going to have to wait on some of those development opportunities to present themselves to decide how we're going to connect them. Obviously, with the right-of-way, some of the slides that you might have seen in the middle of the presentation, since the new boulevard is much narrower than the original I-40 Crosstown, there are actually opportunities to add further development, just as you suggested, in those new areas. As those ramps west of Western are closed, the old on-ramps and the old off-ramps, as access is provided to Klein Avenue, we expect that to happen. So that is actually something we're trying to promote tonight, is future development of West Downtown. We're ready for that when it comes. And so I would give you my assurance from the City of Oklahoma City, we'll start planning with those developers when those projects become realities.
Let's go to Brenda in the back there.
I don't know how you're going to be able to develop this area with the elevated highway and the bridges, speaking of Western. It's just not going to develop. You're putting a barrier to keep this from developing. I do not understand the rationale of leaving the bridges and the elevated highway between Penn and Western. If we've already lost that battle and it's going to stay that way, you just, like, you do not understand the area. Elevated highways, bridges, and trees are a nightmare for our area. And we just need some help.
Thank you. So, if I could comment just briefly on that, I think one of the things that we want to give you some assurances is that traffic's not the only important aspect of the design tonight. Obviously, future development, pedestrian friendliness. The 4 options that you saw tonight actually all work. The one that works the best for traffic and pedestrians is option A. It provides that at-grade access underneath the boulevard through Western Avenue. Now, one of the things that we didn't mention tonight because the design's not complete, but we could look at widened sidewalks, much like it's being looked at on the east end of the boulevard. 15-foot sidewalks provide that connectivity from north to south. We could do the enlarged intersection, option C, but it's not pedestrian friendly. It would be an intersection in Oklahoma City, I think, that most of you are familiar with at Northwest Expressway and 63rd Street. It's simply just not a pedestrian-friendly intersection, but it is possible. The roundabout's also an option. Unfortunately, if the model's correct and development grows at a 1% rate with traffic, it's going to fail in the near future, something on maybe the order of 10 years, and it's something that we're going to have to replace and redo. But I want to give you the assurance that all the options are possible. Tonight, we're making the recommendation for option A.
Moody, I'd like to come to you next.
All right, over here. Yeah. Hi there, Jim Eldridge. I had a question about, well, let me start out with a comment. I've noticed a lot of interesting parallels between this presentation about the boulevard and what I see as kind of an echo on what's happened in 23rd Street over like the past, say, 30, 40 years or so, where you have a very tight street grid west of Broadway with defined intersections and everything's at grade. You cross the Broadway extension intersection and go by the state capitol, and all of a sudden, the street dips down and there's a separation of grade between streets and cars are flying everywhere. And as an avid cyclist and a pedestrian, it's nearly impossible to walk to the state capitol from 23rd Street. I've tried it. I've actually tried biking there too, and it's also nearly impossible. My question is, with the alternatives that are proposed to raise and lower grades and separate grades out, how do you plan to integrate bicyclists and pedestrians and sidewalks and bike lanes into this program where, as a cyclist, it's very difficult to go up a grade and then down one, and as a pedestrian, it's doubly so. And even if we're not going on these roads, it's difficult to go around them, and it's difficult to really imagine this being part of the urban fabric. So how do you propose to integrate this so that pedestrian and bicycle use is a priority, along with cars being able to move in and out of the area?
I think one of the things that you're seeing, and that was one of the recommendations for the grade separation, was provide a better protected pedestrian and bicycle access. What we need to make sure that we do, say if we use the Western as an example, is make sure that we're getting passage underneath that bridge wide enough for pedestrians and bicyclists. But if we can keep it intersection free, agreed, it will make it a lot more safe. As we look at downtown, some of the other things that I think that you'll find too is as we proceed east from Western, we're looking to also reduce the speed limit along the boulevard. We're talking about decelerating highway traffic speed so that by the time we reach the downtown area, we're talking 25-mile-an-hour speed zone. It would then increase on the east side as we go up into Bricktown and reconnect with I-35. But the goals in Oklahoma City are clear, and you've mentioned those tonight. We're wanting to make a more walkable city, one that's pedestrian and bicyclist friendly. And as we continue to expand, we just need to make sure that we're taking that into the design.
I wanted to make a quick note. You guys talk about moving this, 15, 20 years into the future, into 2030. What's our plan to move this into the next century? Because it seems like designs that maintain an urban grid that disperses traffic throughout, that work at grade and allow pedestrians, mixed use, and cars seem to be flexible enough to move into the future. I know along 23rd Street with the street side parking that's now there, the parallel parking, you're starting to see food trucks, you're starting to see businesses come back that have never been there before. And it seems to be a design that doesn't just move us forward 15 years, it can be flexible enough to go the next 100 or 200 years.
Let me go ahead and finish answering that question. I can tell that John has some comments to add too, but obviously when we talk about streets and street right-of-ways and we talk about planning, obviously when we work from a city's perspective, we try to look as far into the future as possible and anticipate where growth may occur. When we look at street right-of-ways, there is actually property outside of what you see on a normal street setting where it's from curb to curb. So we can have opportunities through existing right-of-way. Sometimes it requires right-of-way to be expanded, but there are opportunities for us to provide for future growth in the city. You see that a lot in the downtown area now as we start to widen streets, or at least widen rights of way, but you're actually starting to see streets narrow in some cases. We're actually reducing lane widths to help mitigate speeds and improve, again, bicyclists and pedestrians. So there's a lot of planning that goes into this. It's not something that I could tell you that we're going to fix all the streets at once. It's a development tool that we're going to have to work together as we plan into the future. Right now, we need to make sure that we've got the western corridor correct, but we'll work in other areas of the city as well.
One of the problems you have when you're dealing with what are basically cartoons or highly simplified diagrams is you really don't get the level of detail that went into the analysis. Another thing is that there's a separate firm that's been hired to actually look at that downtown core area. We had started putting together some information to talk about what the options for pedestrian improvements and bicycle improvements and so forth could actually look like in that area. But because that was being done by the Parsons Brinkerhoff firm, Mr. Hester is in the room, a good friend of mine. They're doing that work, and I think if we had that information in front of you, you'd be able to see that there really has been a tremendous amount of attention to those kinds of improvements in that area. We have analyzed the entire corridor, and Alternative A is a superior design for pedestrian and bicycle long-term. And the other thing I would say, I'm a land use planner with 34 years experience, there's going to be specific issues that have to be addressed with individual properties along the corridor, but I'm completely convinced that it provides a better opportunity for development and redevelopment of the future along the corridor than a huge intersection would. You'd literally be sentencing yourself to huge delays on and air quality issues at that intersection, and it would not be pedestrian friendly.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go to the center of the room right there.
Yes, my name is Jerry Parrott, and I've heard a lot of good things tonight about West Oklahoma City. It seems to me like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the next and only place for Oklahoma City to expand is now west. Everything's gone north, it's gone different directions. So I'm glad to see a lot of things happening that direction. I want to make one other observation. It seems to me the area from what we're talking about tonight on west, with leaving the road elevated, leaves us a bunch of bridges under there. And we've seen pictures and we've seen people living under bridges, which is not a nice thing, but it's a lot more difficult to live under a piece of concrete on ground level than it is under a bridge. So that would help solve one of the problems. The other thing I would like to make a comment about is that we're talking about business, economy booming and doing things in Oklahoma City. The best way to make the economy boom is to have more businesses. More businesses are difficult to put next to a retaining wall or an elevated roadway or whatever. Businesses belong and people go into business on streets that they can have pedestrians come in and walk in. They can have cars park outside their door. The more we can get on ground level, it seems to me the best solution for any of this to help business as it goes. With that in mind, I think the bridge over the Boulevard and Western A seems to be an exception to that. I certainly agree with the fact having another stoplight is not the solution. Probably having a roundabout is not either. A or B solve the problem equally well. But it just seemed to me that one of the things we've done is to get rid of the dividing line that was I-40, and now we still have one from Klein to Pennsylvania that's a dividing line just as effective as I-40 was. We need to identify that, to address that.
Clinton, I'd like to come to you next, please. If the microphone works this time.
The modified intersection at Klein and Reno. Let me go ahead and have you.
The diagrams that you saw, and I can address individual comments in the back on those enlarged graphics if you'd like. But in essence, at Klein, as you come as you come eastbound on the boulevard, you will be able to turn right at Klein and head down to the Reno intersection. So right now, I believe it's barricaded off. In the future, as the new boulevard is built, you'll be able to come down eastbound on the boulevard, turn right, head down to Reno to a signalized intersection. At that point, you can go back to the west, further to the south, or further to the east. Did I get at your question, or is there? Okay.
I have a question, if I may, Eric, for Stantec.
Is it a planning question or an engineering
It
question?
has both. My question is, how many elevated streetways are being developed through downtowns in the United States right now? Are there any?
Absolutely. One of the things that we find when you have the potential for growth, especially large businesses, you find that they want to be located where they have easy access in and out of those businesses. The location of the boulevard, I think John had one tremendous slide where it showed 4 major east-west corridors all within an 800-foot zone. That's a real challenge to handle. When you throw into that the exchange alignment, you throw into that the on and off ramps at Western, there's a tremendous amount of traffic in that area. But businesses typically are looking for easy access in and out. And that means that there's a fair amount of traffic being involved. And when you have the boulevard with roughly 40,000 vehicles a day and Western with 20 to 30,000 vehicles a day, the only option to effectively and functionally accommodate that is to grade separate that intersection.
Could I follow up? Secondarily, the mayor brought for his roundtable the mayor of Salt Lake City, and they have a very strangely similar 2 interstates close to the downtown. It's all on ground and it's all grid. And if they can do that, I don't understand why we can't do the same thing.
Well, I probably have to look at the details of the volumes that they're dealing with, but typically when you're looking at a roundabout or a signalized intersection, there is a threshold after which the intersection starts to degrade in its functionality. And we feel very confident that these alternatives as presented tonight provide the ability to accommodate the traffic. However, alternative A and B happen to do so in a slightly more efficient manner, and that's why they've been proposed.
And finally, this is for Eric, the city. You talked about, I think you used the term byways, that we need a byway for Interstate 40. That sounded like we'd promised the federal government that we were going to do that as part of the mitigation. I don't know of any interstates anywhere in the United States that have a byway, and I've never heard, and I was involved in the initial mitigation when we were talking about migrating this highway, that you're talking about moving, as Blair said, the number of lanes from 4 to 6 and so forth. You can do anything you want. And this idea that the federal government is requiring us to have a byway and to use the boulevard to be a through, to move people beyond everything else, I don't believe that's accurate.
It's a bypass, and it's actually in the record of decision. And Debbie, I'd be happy to share that with you. I didn't bring the previous presentation, but it's a part of that, and I'll get that to you and make that available.
But you can change. Blair's question really wasn't answered. You can change from 4 to 6 lanes. You don't have to. There is no requirement of the federal government to do, I don't think, Eric, what you're talking about.
If we honor the original agreement, it is required. I think the question was, can the agreement change? And I think Mr. Streb mentioned that it's possible it could change. I don't know if it's probable that it'll change, but yes, it could change. And I think as we look at this partnership between the city and ODOT, I think we're encouraged by the invitation that the city was given from the state to participate in the overall design process, for us to have meetings like this one to make it a better boulevard. And I think that's where our sense of encouragement is because we've got a tremendous opportunity to do some things we might not have otherwise been possible. But with that, let me share the original agreement. And as we work forward from tonight, I think as we get additional questions, I'd be happy to answer those. But.
Well, I think the only thing you're really required by the feds is the NEPA requirements. You're not required that other thing. That is between ODOT and the city. And if you want to stick with it, you can. But the idea that's being given out is this is a federal requirement, and I just don't think that's accurate.
Clinton, we're going to try one more time.
Great. Thank you. It does work. I just want to make a couple of observations, and really I've been involved in this project from its inception. I was part of the planning team that proposed the original elevated section that was going to land at Walker. One of the reasons that we did that, and incidentally, we proposed that in 2002, so this meeting is 10 years in the making. I don't quite understand why it took 10 years to have this meeting, but maybe others can enlighten us. The original plan was to keep the elevated section and land at Walker. I think we all realize that. The reason why we proposed that concept was because the street intersections with the boulevard were virtually impossible to resolve. And I think all the work that's been done and all the analysis that's been done so far proves that point out. I think one of the most beautiful things about Oklahoma City is its grid system. As an earlier commentator said, the easiest way to navigate a city is on a grid. It provides all the best alternatives. The proposal A actually does not allow through traffic on Western, on Classen, on Chartel, on Lee. It dead ends California, and it does not allow 2nd Street to go through. It is a complete interruption of the grid. It separates businesses on the south side of the boulevard from potential businesses on the north side of the boulevard. I spent Sunday afternoon on my bicycle riding around the project area. For those of you that don't know the area, south of the boulevard are a tremendous number of small businesses, big-time employers, which we are virtually cutting off from the north side of the boulevard. I understand the analysis that's gone into this has been thorough. I appreciate the process. I just want everybody in this room to understand that if we adopt alternate A, that there will be a tremendous amount of disconnectivity between the north side of the boulevard and the south side of the boulevard. My parting comment would be, it is baffling to me that it has taken 10 years to have this conversation. For elected officials to say that they did not know what the proposal was is unconscionable. This has been on the table for 10 years, since the 2002 ROD that was there for everybody to see and everybody to understand. Many people in this room that really understand what they mean in 3 dimensions. The traffic models are great, you know, the synchro models and all that give us a great 2-dimensional view, but I am interested in us understanding this in 3 dimensions. And so I think to take a little more time for us to take a little more time, to allow us a little more study, to understand these alternatives better, would be time well spent. I don't think there is anything, really pressing for us, you know, that we can't take a few more months. And I hope that, Eric, you are not going to press us to accept alternate A without a little more conversation. That's all. Thank you.
Brenda?
Hello. Wow. My name is Brian Hull. I have a couple of questions and a comment. First of all, in the alternative A and B, which it looks like we're going to be with one or the others from what the vibe seems to be. My question is the properties, first of all, the properties in the 1000 block of West Reno, the ones whose rear of the businesses are to the ODOT right-of-way of the proposed boulevard. There's an alley back there. That alley gets used. Is that alley going to continue to exist, or have we gotten that deep into the analysis? My second question is, what are you planning to do with this land that you're going to create? you're closing Classen, you're putting the Western through the McDonald's parking lot over onto Classen, and then it's going to create some land between, some surplus land on the west of Western, on the south of Sheridan, and to the north of the boulevard. What are we planning to do with this? This is a light industrial area. A lot of people are talking about grids. A lot of people are talking about bicycling and stuff like that. This is a light industrial area. There's a lot of people that work down here. There are a lot of jobs. I don't see this being transformed into a deep deuce type neighborhood for downtown. If it was, it would be at a cost of an awful lot of jobs. And then, well, there's my comment. So if you could maybe answer those questions for me, thank you.
Sure. I think one of the comments that we had earlier in the presentation is I think the light industrial nature of the further west area is definitely considered, and that was one of the primary reasons that we felt that you couldn't close Reno. You had to keep Reno open to make sure that access was maintained. When we talk about the alley that is maybe existing, or we talk about those new areas of right-of-way that might become available, we simply haven't made any decisions on what best to do with those yet, but we see those as development opportunities. Business expansions, new businesses, new opportunities for West Downtown. Not suggesting that it would be another deep deuce. Don't know what the nature of the West Side development might look like, but we want to give every opportunity to make that happen, whatever it is. And so as we look at taking out some unique segments of streets, whether those be some of the older off-ramps off of the Interstate 40, the on-ramps to Interstate 40 that bisect a lot of available property, trying to open that up and make it more usable again is one of the goals, and hopefully we're able to show that tonight. But again, no decisions have been made on how that property might become available or be transferred.
Okay, and back to the alley, some of those properties back there, that's where your garbage is picked up. There we have doors facing the alley that we use on a regular basis. Of course, if that alley were eliminated, as I don't see it in these drawings at all because you're closing Classen and that's where the alley comes out. I'm sorry to take this down on such a macro level, but it has a very big, even small things like that can have a very large impact on our availability to make use of our property.
Absolutely. So alleys and street right-of-ways, if we get into some of the specifics, private property is actually extended to the center line of alleys and the center line of street right-of-ways. Those are public rights-of-way. So if one of those happened to be vacated by the city, the ownership of the alley would go towards the adjacent property owners at the center line. Now, obviously, if we need to maintain some access for some critical services, we'd need to work with the individual owners like yourself and make sure that that wasn't eliminated. But the ownership of alleys would be your property if you were adjacent to that. Individual issues, kind of like we talked about before, as we develop and future plan, we're going to have to work out those independent issues one at a time as we move forward. This isn't something that's going to happen quickly. This is something that's going to take some time, and tonight it's just concepts. There aren't any designs, and so what you're seeing is very rough in nature. We're going to have to go through a lot more of a detailed analysis before I can be certain on the response, but we'll definitely coordinate with you directly. Oh, sorry.
I wanted to just comment on the fact that I've watched these meetings and I've listened to the comments and I've read a number of the blogs that have been written and the articles, and it's clear that there's a really strong interest in Oklahoma City in making the downtown, continuing to make the downtown more livable and expanding the pedestrian-friendly, compact part of downtown. And there was a comment that was made earlier about the only place the city has to develop is to the west. And I would suggest to you that if you're really sincere about wanting to have that pedestrian-friendly urban environment, the place to look is around the new park that's being designed. And I'm convinced that with the boulevard enhancements that'll be in that downtown area, that the opportunity for strong visual ties and physical connections, I would suggest to you that the best place for mixed-use development and the next great place for residential in downtown would be in and around that park. And a very logical way for the community to continue to grow that pattern of development would be incrementally in stages from that point out. And frankly, from my perspective, looking at a number of the land uses in response to the comment that the gentleman just made, there's a lot of uses along this corridor that aren't light industrial, they're heavy industrial. And if you look at WW Steel and others, there's significant industrial uses out there with very large landowners, and they're not going to become pedestrian-friendly or residential places anytime soon.
Craig, I'd like to come to you next.
Hi, my name is Phil Hughes, and we have about 10 people who have been working on a $5 billion rail system for Oklahoma City called MetNet. And there's some things I just wanted to frame the question for commentary on putting a downtown rail line through at some point in time. And I think it might solve some issues. But first, I'd like to position it by saying, hierarchy at the highest part, we've got to get back to the business of manufacturing in the United States. We've got to drop the cost of living. Some people won't be able to afford a car. And these poor children, their parents and themselves should have dignity without having to have a car. Secondly, the convention center has got to be located at the Producers Co-op. That's the only place that we can get a land space large enough to accommodate something even approaching George R. Brown in Houston. Otherwise, we're just building what's already been built. Third, we have to have a ubiquitous and homogeneous metro rail network throughout central Oklahoma, all 3 counties and possibly going to Shawnee. And then fourth, we have a $1 trillion proposal for high-speed rail across the nation that I affirm to you is catching on very quickly. And I think that's going to put change all over the nation. So we got a choice whether to be there with it or to be irrelevant, so to speak. Now, here's the solutions. There'd be 2 train stations, one at Farmers Market and one at Bricktown. So now all of a sudden, the people who are concerned about less traffic, you will not imagine how many people you will have through there with a train station close by to those locations. Secondly, if you could imagine taking what ODOT proposes and drop the lanes on either side of grade level like they want to, but keep a green promenade going up and over the tracks, we would have an excellent outlook and a beautiful, I think, architectural embellishment to the city. It wouldn't be a large elevated, it'd be a fairly small footprint. We drop it down to either, we can leave the median elevated and go over the BNS tracks, and it would actually be best, I think, to keep everything elevated again. I think we need to admit that we maybe should have, we can reconstruct what we had before, but make it more attractive. I don't see taking any rail at grade level, or excuse me, any streets at grade level through Bricktown. If you've got 4 lanes, you've got a lot of traffic. If you've got 6 lanes, as the gentleman pointed out, you've got 100 feet to cross. I think we ought to consider maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we want to elevate it and only drop the lanes down in the Walker area as you propose. So
Phil, if I could, I think those are great ideas. I'd like to get with you after the meeting if you can stay, and I'd like to get the rest of your input because I think you have some things that I'd love to visit with you afterwards if you can.
Last thing, Eric, just some general commentary, if you could, as to what provisions are being made we need to have that high-capacity metro rail artery through the center of town. And I heard from Neil McCaleb that they are looking. He yelled out the probability that it would be put in the current footprint and what is being done there.
Yeah, let me visit with you afterwards. Thank you.
Clinton, I'll take you next.
So work. Hi, I'm Kathy Cummings, a local business owner here in Oklahoma City. And I guess I'm a little confused as to what the panel's definition of a boulevard is, because I've always thought of a boulevard as being a beautiful road with tree-lined streets and businesses and parents pushing their babies in strollers and bicyclists and pedestrians. It sounds like we're trying to build another highway, which we've already built I-40 to bring traffic in and out of the city, of the downtown area. I guess I'm just wondering why we got away from the beauty of the whole boulevard and the accessibility to all the local businesses and the new homes that are going to be down there.
So I think tonight's presentation, when we focused just on Western, Classen, and Reno, was just a small piece of the boulevard design. There's a much bigger boulevard to discuss, and one that is tree-lined, one that has a median, one that has a lot of opportunities. It's one that transitions off of Interstate 44 from the west and Interstate 35 on the east into something to the heart of downtown that I think that you can keep those expectations alive, something that's not yet designed and something that we're going to actually bring back to you in the future. But for tonight's perspective, there were a lot of concerns at the last public meeting about the proposal to span Western, Classen, and Reno with an 1,100-foot bridge that we wanted to make sure that we studied further, came up with alternatives, and hopefully we've been able to do that and show you part of that process tonight. So I would encourage you to attend one of our future meetings. I would anticipate that probably be in the spring, where you'll actually see those new renderings of the vision that I think you described.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think finally Brenda over there.
I have a question that was going to ask you, in looking at all these drawings, I could not determine what was at grade and what was above grade or below grade. Could you go through the four alternatives and kind of point that out? And also in the future, it'd be a lot easier if you could include some kind of drawing on the map or some kind of indication as to what is at grade and what is not at grade. Thank you.
You're welcome. So what I'm gonna use this as a transitional comment and a closure at the same time. So the answer to the question is there are a number of drawings that we have at the back of the four alternatives that were shown tonight, and we're gonna have staff available at the tables that would like to assist you in kind of going over that, but let me answer the question as well for the group. If you look at option A, B, C, and D, A and B, there is a grade difference. There is a bridge over Western in option A, so it's in the air at Western. Option B, Western is in the air over the boulevard. Option C is on the ground, intersection on the ground, and then option D, the roundabout, is on the ground. Now, as we look west of Western, Klein is on the ground in all the options. Anything at Reno East is also on the ground in all of the options. But I think those are probably better shared through some of the drawings. And so with that, I think we'll try to improve the renderings in the future. I thought we did pretty good tonight, but I do know that it's sometimes challenging to look at some of the conceptual drawings. I mentioned the comment cards as we started the Q&A, and so if you didn't get your question answered, there's two options for you tonight. One is to stay after, and we've got plenty of staff that are here to help answer those questions. Option two is to use one of the written comment cards and write your comment and leave it for us on the table as you leave. There is actually the third option. If you think of something afterwards, please send that in to us. We're going to leave those open for 2 weeks. If there was somebody that you know that wasn't able to attend the meeting, please send those in. This is really important to us that we get this right for you. I appreciate the comments tonight. I know ODOT, as partners, appreciate. And again, we thank you for your attendance tonight. Have a safe drive home. Thank you. The question was whether or not the comments could be submitted online. The answer is yes, they can be submitted online.